I held the card in my hand and stared at the words again. Dear Lorraine, you're sweet, but this Easter's sweeter if you leave us be. I didn't say a word. My chest felt tight, not from surprise, but from how familiar this kind of silence had become. The laughter behind me was loud. Too loud, like they needed it to drown something out. Julian didn't look up. Tasha smiled like she just handed me a party favor. They were all so proud of their little moment. And me? I was just standing there, holding a chocolate bunny and a letter asking me to disappear. I wanted to believe it was a joke, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Have you ever felt that, dear? The exact moment your place in a family quietly expires? I stepped back. The Florida sun hit the foil on the bunny. It sparkled, pretty on the outside, empty inside. Just like this morning. Just like the way they've been treating me for months. I sat down on the back porch. No one followed. No one even noticed I was gone. I looked at the card again. Sweet if I leave. That's what they really meant, didn't they? Not just for Easter, but in general. Maybe I'd been too hopeful. I thought moving in after Harold died would mean closeness, comfort. I thought they'd want me here. But it's been clear for a while. I take up space. I cook with ingredients Tasha doesn't approve of. I tell stories the kids roll their eyes at. I ask questions Julian doesn't answer. And still, I tried. I baked cookies this morning. My best recipe. Just in case, I thought maybe they'd see I still had something to give. But no one asked for them. Tasha gave me that bunny instead, and a message wrapped in ribbon. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Just quiet. I watched the chocolate soften in the heat. Its ears drooped like mine. Inside, they toasted mimosas. One of the kids said something in a fake accent, trying to sound like me. More laughter? I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was just tired. Tired of waiting for a chair at a table that used to be mine. Tired of being background noise in a life I helped build. Tired of smiling when I feel like I'm being erased. I closed the card, set it down beside the cookies, the same cookies no one touched, and then I stood up. I didn't say goodbye. Didn't wave, I just walked. Past the hydrangeas I planted. Past the driveway I helped pressure wash last summer. Past the mailbox that still says, the Mendez family, though I don't think it means me anymore. At the corner, I turned around once. They were still laughing, my chair was still empty. And that bunny was melting into the table just like I had. They think I have nothing. No worth, no say, but they don't know. I still own half the resort Tasha dreams of renting. She never asked. She just assumed. And today, she assumed wrong. They want sweet. Fine. But next Easter, I'll be something else entirely. Back then, he couldn't even reach the stove. I still remember the way Julian would drag a milk crate across the kitchen tiles, grunting as it scraped, determined to be tall enough to stir the pot. He'd climb up, 6 years old, apron crooked, face smudged with flour, and beam at me like he'd just conquered Everest. Can I taste now? He'd ask, wooden spoon already halfway to his mouth. You stir first? I'd say, gently nudging the pot toward him. Then you earn a taste. We didn't have much, but that kitchen, Lord, that kitchen was full. Full of music and garlic and the kind of love you don't need to explain. I taught him how to smell when onions were ready, not just look. I taught him to feel the tension in dough. To wait, not rush the heat. To trust his hands. When Harold and I finally opened our own kitchen at the Baudelaire Resort, Julian was barely 11. But he was there. He'd stand behind the service window on Friday nights, hair slicked back, tie too long, taking notes. Asking questions no child should have cared about. But he cared. Back then, he did. He once told a food critic, "My mom doesn't cook food. She builds it." I laughed. But I never forgot that. He made me believe that all those late nights, burnt fingers, and sleepless prep hours meant something. That I wasn't just feeding strangers. I was feeding legacy. He was part of every dish I ever created. The way I plated gumbo, just slightly off-center, the mint tucked into every panna cotta. The hush puppies crisped in memory of my mother. Even after Harold died, even when the booking slowed, I held on because Julian said, "Mom, this place is who we are." But now he laughs when his wife hands me a chocolate bunny and a card that says, "Leave us be." Now he lets his children mock the way I speak, the way I bake, the way I breathe. And I keep wondering, what changed? Is it her? Is it me? Or is it just time? Time has a way of erasing the good parts if you're not careful. But I remember. And as long as I remember, I still have something they can't touch. Harold used to say, "The world forgets women like you the minute you go quiet." He said it once in the walk-in fridge, holding a crate of parsley, sweat beading on his temple. We'd been fighting over schedules. I said I was tired. He just looked at me. "Don't let them shrink you, Lo," he whispered. "Even when you're wary, especially then." He believed in me before I believed in myself. Harold wasn't poetic, but his love came in truth. Sharp, grounding. Like a knife honed for decades, clean, without flourish. The night he passed, I stayed in our kitchen until sunrise. Didn't cook. Didn't cry. I just stood at the prep table, hands still smelling of garlic and thyme, staring at the apron he left folded. The silence felt permanent. After the funeral, I tried. Stayed 3 more months at the Baudelaire. But something in me broke. Not loudly, not with drama, just slowly. I stopped correcting the line cooks. Stopped adjusting the lighting. Stopped putting mint on the panna cotta. One evening, I turned off the pilot light and didn't turn it back on. That was the night I packed the spice rack. One by one. I remember labeling each jar in case I ever needed to remember who I was. When I told Julian I was moving in with them, he didn't ask why. He just said, "We'll make space." I wish he had asked. I wish I had answered honestly. Because the truth is, I wasn't broke. I wasn't helpless. I was just scared. Scared of waking up alone on a Sunday. Scared of no one saying my name out loud. Scared of becoming a ghost in a house full of echoes. So I went. Brought my apron, and my cookies, and all the quiet parts of me I thought they might still love. But I was wrong. They didn't want the woman who built a life. They wanted a shadow of her. Smiling. Still. Soft. That Easter morning when Tasha handed me that bunny and card, something Harold once told me came roaring back. They can only erase you if you hand them the chalk. And Lord knows, I've held still long enough. You could contribute by not interrupting the vibe. Tasha said it with a smile. Soft voice, nails painted the color of bone. She was arranging her little jade rollers on a bamboo tray. The kitchen smelled like lemon diffusers and collagen powder. I had just offered to make soup. Not for guests, just for the family. It was raining. The kids were homesick. Back in New Orleans, that meant gumbo on the stove before noon. "I wasn't going to use butter," I said, almost apologetic. Tasha looked up, her eyebrows barely twitching. "It's not about the ingredients, Lorraine. It's just the vibration." Julian kept drying dishes, silent. Like always, I stood there with carrots in my hand, suddenly unsure where to put them. "Do I chop? Do I step aside?" Tasha continued adjusting her display. "I'm planning a test run for the wellness retreat next Sunday," she said. "Just a mock version. Some of my brand partners are flying in." She pulled out a folded checklist, passed it to Julian. "Need help finalizing the space, love?" I waited. No one asked me anything. "No, could you prep? No, do you have suggestions? No, would you like to be involved?" I was a chef. I'd fed hundreds. Built menus from scratch. But here, I didn't even get a seat at the kitchen island. Tasha flipped open her iPad. "I've been looking at personal chefs. We don't want the space smelling like oil before guests arrive. Maybe something raw clean. Cucumber-based." She said it while I was standing 5 feet away, still holding the carrots. Still breathing. Julian finally said, "Mom made great cucumber soup when I was little. It was soft. Too soft." Tasha didn't respond. Just kept scrolling. I placed the carrots on the counter and turned toward the hallway. Behind me, their voices kept going. "Wellness has a look, Jules," she said. "It's curated. Your mom's cooking is nostalgic, but it doesn't align with the brand." That's when I knew. It wasn't about noise, or smell, or butter. It was about erasing me slowly, with smiles, with silence, with words that cut softer than knives. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the guest bed, the same bed I made every morning, just so no one could say I took up space. I looked at my hands. They used to create art, used to sign paychecks, used to teach a little boy how to trust a hot pan. Now they just rested. I kept hearing her voice in my head, not interrupting the vibe. Funny how people find new ways to say, "You're in the way." That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls in this house are thin. Thinner when your heart is bruised. I crept down the hallway for tea. Quiet. Careful. I wasn't trying to hear anything. But sound has a way of finding you when you least want it. "She means well," Julian said. Then came the part that stayed. "I just wish she'd stop hovering." Hovering. That word stuck harder than any insult. Not helping. Not supporting. Just hovering. I stood there on the last stair, not moving, not breathing. Down the hallway, Tasha's voice followed, smooth and low. "She's trying, I know. But her energy, it shifts everything. The kids feel it." Their voices blurred after that, like a door had closed even though none had. I turned around. Each step back to my room felt heavier than the last. Back inside, I sat on the edge of the bed. The same bed I made each morning, pillows aligned, corners tucked, just so no one could say I was messy, or difficult, or too much. I listened to the hum of the air purifier in the corner. Julian installed it when I moved in, said it was for my comfort. Now it sounded like it was covering me up. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I stared at the dresser drawer a long time, then opened it, pulled out the small tin of cinnamon sticks I'd brought from New Orleans. My favorite kind, sharp, earthy real. Harold used to brew them in tea when my head hurt. Said they grounded me. I hadn't used them here. Not once. Still, tonight I held them, rolled one between my fingers, let the scent rise, faint, familiar home. I walked downstairs again. No lights on now, just kitchen shadows and appliance glows. I opened the pantry, found my jar tucked behind a row of branded oat spreads. But something was different. A white label now wrapped around the lid. Neat handwriting, Tasha's. Do not use, not aligned. That's all it said, not expired, not unsafe. Just not aligned, like me. I stood still, holding the jar. Suddenly, I remembered how I labeled each spice jar back at the resort. How I taught Julian to write turmeric when he was 7. His letters lopsided and proud. Now I couldn't even use cinnamon in my own kitchen. I placed the jar back gently, closed the pantry, stood there in the dark for a long while. No pots simmering, no footsteps, no one looking for me, only the air purifier upstairs. A soft hum constant, it used to soothe me. Now it sounded like silence with instructions. The paper looked harmless. No bold letters, no stamps, just calm fonts and wide margins, tucked neatly into a manila folder. Tasha slid it across the table between spoonfuls of chia pudding. Mom, would you mind signing this today? Just a tiny formality. I looked at the folder, didn't open it. What is it? I asked, gently. She smiled. The kind of smile you reserve for hotel staff. Oh, it's nothing serious, just a healthcare support clause, so we can manage things for you, in case of anything. Her voice was buttered, soft edges, no weight. Julian sat beside her, quiet. He cut into his banana slices like the conversation wasn't about me. I waited. No explanation came. So power of attorney? I asked. Tasha blinked. Well, sort of, she said, but really just to make sure we can advocate for you when needed. It's common. She pushed the folder closer. I didn't touch it. I reached for my tea instead. The cup was warm, the handle smooth, but my hands were cold. Tasha, I said carefully, I'm still capable of making my own decisions. Of course you are, she said too fast. Well, I just want to be prepared. It's not about now. I turned to Julian. Is this from a lawyer? He nodded, eyes fixed on his plate. Yes, it's standard. We had it reviewed. Had it reviewed? Not even written for me. I opened the folder, just one page. At the top of our durable financial and medical proxy authorization, my name, their address, Julian and Tasha listed as joint agents. I read the words line by line. They were calm words, legal words. But something inside me prickled. Not panic, not outrage. Just the smallest crack in the floor under my feet. I set the paper down. Tasha kept smiling, but her fingers tapped the table, light, fast. We can always revisit it later if you're not ready, she said. But her tone added, this would be easier now. I nodded and smiled back. But I didn't pick up the pen. I remembered the cinnamon jar, the words do not use. The way Julian had said, overing, like I was some outdated appliance. I glanced at my hands. Still steady? Still mine? I stood up, took the paper. I'll read it upstairs, I said. Tasha's smile dimmed just slightly. Julian cleared his throat. I left the table, paper in hand. Upstairs, I closed the door gently. Not in anger, but in defense. I sat by the window, held the pen, let the morning light wash across the page. Then I put both down. I didn't need to be told in print that I was losing space. I could feel it. I waited until the house fell still. No diffuser humming from the hallway, no footsteps, no Tasha chirping about balance or light meals, only the quiet hum of night and the soft click of my bedroom door closing behind me. I sat down at the desk in the corner, the one they said I could decorate however I like. It still held nothing but a coaster and a lamp. I opened my laptop. It blinked awake slowly, like me. I hadn't checked my retirement account in months. There was no reason to. I wasn't spending. I didn't need much. I lived in their house, didn't I? But something inside me stirred. I logged in, typed carefully, waited when the screen loaded. The number was still high, but lower than it should have been. That's when I saw it. A withdrawal. 6C500? Label. Shared housing contribution, joint utilities and maintenance. Dated 6 weeks ago. I leaned closer. Another entry. 3 months product 800. Labeled. Household coordination L another. December 4th 200 wellness support cushion. I every line polite, every line precise. But none of them mine. No call, no email, no conversation at the table. Not even a sticky note. They hadn't asked. They had decided. I sat back in the chair. My hands rested in my lap. Still, I didn't cry.
Didn't speak.
Didn't move. Just stared at my name in the corner of the screen. First name, middle initial, last name. Lorraine Mendez. It felt distant. Like someone I used to know. I remembered Harold. How he made me read every line of every paper, no matter how small. They'll call it a formality, low, he once said. But paper has a long memory. I clicked the print icon. Watched the tiny printer in the corner come to life. Each line emerging like proof. Like breath returning to lungs that had held too much. I folded the pages neatly. Slid them into a folder I hadn't touched since I moved in. Then opened the bottom drawer, pulled out a yellow legal pad. The same kind I used at the resort when inventory ran short. I wrote down every transaction, every label, every date. The pen felt heavy, not from ink, but from what I knew now could no longer be unknown. At breakfast the next morning, Tasha asked, "Did you sleep okay?" I looked up, smiled lightly. "Light sleep," I said, "but steady." She nodded, satisfied. Julian scrolled his phone. The kids fought over almond butter. No one asked anything else. They didn't know, and I didn't offer. Because silence can be survival, and noticing is its first weapon. They thought I wasn't paying attention. But I was. Now more than ever. And when you've spent your life feeding people, you know the exact moment when something starts to turn. I stopped coming down for breakfast. Not out of protest. Just wariness. It was easier to sit by the window upstairs with my tea. Watch the sun crawl up the trees. Pretend the voices downstairs didn't belong to people I once called family. Tasha didn't ask where I was. Julian brought up a bowl once, chia and bananas, already browning. He didn't stay long, didn't meet my eyes. I thanked him, closed the door, let the bowl sit untouched until evening. By the third day, no one knocked anymore. I started keeping my own hours, read books I never finished, listen to old jazz on low volume, let the kitchen remain someone else's domain. And the silence, it stopped feeling unfamiliar. It started feeling deserved. Maybe I had pushed too hard, clung too long, expected too much. I tried not to think about it. One afternoon I heard soft steps outside my door, then a knock. Gentle, 2 taps. Before I could speak, it opened just a crack. "Grandma?" It was Leela. 8 years old. The quiet one. The one who didn't interrupt. The one who always noticed. She stepped inside, her socks mismatched, a marker stain on her shirt. "I didn't see you at lunch," she said. I smiled. I wasn't hungry, sweetheart. She walked closer, eyes big, honest. Then she asked, soft, almost whispering,
Are you sad?
The question landed with no sharpness. Just truth. I opened my mouth, closed it. What do you tell a child when your sadness is a hallway you haven't found the end of? I looked at her. Really looked. This was the first time in weeks, maybe months, that someone waited for my answer. Not to correct me, not to dismiss, just to listen. I reached out and brushed her hair behind her ear. It was soft, a little tangled.
Real. No, Leela.
I said gently, not sad, then paused. Just quieter these days. She nodded, like she understood more than she should. I like quiet too, she whispered, then pulled something from her hoodie pocket. A folded drawing, crayon lines uneven, a picture of a kitchen, and me, in the middle, smiling, holding a spoon like a wand. I held the paper between my fingers. There was a lump in my throat I didn't expect. Not from pain, but from being remembered. I made it for you, she said. 'Cause you make the best cookies. I didn't answer right away. I just held her close, longer than I should have, and in that moment something inside me stopped disappearing. The next morning, I woke before the sun. No alarm, no reason, just something inside reaching. The house was still. I could hear the cicadas outside, the faint drip of the sink downstairs. The kind of quiet I used to love in New Orleans, right before a brunch rush. When everything smelled like potential. I wrapped myself in a shawl and crept down the hallway, into the kitchen I hadn't touched in months. The space looked unfamiliar. White counters, sanitized surfaces, all the spice jars in straight lines, alphabetized. But the oven still worked, and so did I. I found the old recipe card in my purse. Creased butter stained, soft at the edges, cinnamon sugar crinkles, Harold's favorite. Leela's too, though she didn't know that yet. I mixed quietly, measured without thinking, hands steady. By the time the first tray went in, the sky outside was just beginning to shift from blue to gold. The smell came fast, warm, sweet, real. I didn't cook for them, Not anymore. I cooked for the part of me that needed to feel alive again. The part they had no use for. But I still did. Footsteps creaked upstairs. Voices stirred. Then silence again. No one came down. No one said anything I didn't expect them to. I took out the tray, let it cool. Broke one cookie open, steam rising, sugar melting into the cracks just right. I tasted it. Still mine. Still good. I packed a few into a paper bag. Folded the top neatly. Wrote on a slip of note paper. For the girl who sees. I placed it on the edge of the kitchen table. Her spot next to the window. Then I cleaned up. Washed every bowl. Wiped down the counter. Left no trace. By the time Tasha came downstairs in her yoga wrap, the oven was cold again. She looked around, sniffed. Paused for half a second. Then walked past without a word. Julian followed. Eyes glazed from sleep. He didn't glance at the table. That was fine. I didn't bake for applause. Upstairs, I heard Leela's small voice. The sound of her feet hopping down one step at a time, a pause.
A rustle. Then, Grandma.
I turned. She was holding the bag. Smiling. You made these? She asked. I nodded. They smell like hugs, she whispered. I laughed just once. Quiet, but full. She sat at the table. Opened the bag. Took a bite. I didn't need to ask if she liked them. I could see it in her face. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's the soft crunch of sugar, and the knowing that someone still tastes what you made, and knows it came from your hands. They called it a soft opening. Tasha's words, not mine. A preview of her future retreat brand, hosted in a sacred, grounded family home. Our home, the dining room, was transformed. White orchids, sage bundles, guest cards in gold ink. Everything curated.
Except me.
I wasn't invited, not officially. But I stayed nearby, wiping countertops that didn't need wiping, straightening chairs that weren't mine. When the first guests arrived, Tasha greeted them like a hostess in a catalog. Welcome, welcome. This space holds clean energy. We're honored to host. She wore pale linen, flowing sleeves, no shoes. Julian hovered behind her, always half a step late, echoing her lines like a trained second voice. They passed by me once in the hallway. Tasha didn't acknowledge me. Julian said morning, Mom, and kept walking. I stayed in the kitchen, kept busy with trays and utensils. It was easier than standing still. I hadn't cooked. Wasn't asked to. Tasha had hired a plant-based caterer, professional but minimal. Still, I cleared plates, poured tea, folded napkins into perfect little boats. Just like Harold taught me. No one noticed. That was the worst part. Not that they ignored me, but that it didn't take effort. I moved through that house like a shadow, silent, absorbed, expected. Midway through the brunch, I stepped out to collect empty glasses. Guests were chatting in gentle tones, sipping cucumber spritzers and talking about chakras and liver resets. A woman in coral silk turned to me. She smiled politely, then offered her empty flute and asked, "Are you the help?" Just like that, 4 words, no malice, no cruelty, just certainty. I blinked. For a second, I wanted to correct her. To say, no, I'm Julian's mother. To say, this is my home too. To say, I built a kitchen more refined than this entire buffet. But the words didn't come. So I nodded. She placed the glass on my tray, turned back to her conversation, forgot me instantly. I stood there a moment too long. Tasha saw it. Across the room, she saw the exchange. Her lips curved slightly, not cruel, but satisfied, like a puzzle piece had clicked into place. Like I'd finally accepted the role she'd reserved for me all along. I returned to the kitchen, washed each glass slowly, methodically. I didn't cry. Tears would have felt like permission. Instead, I remembered something Harold once said during a busy wedding rush. You know the moment they stop seeing you, he told me, is when you start deciding who you want to be again. At the time, I thought he meant burnout. Now I knew better. After the last flute was dry, I stood at the sink. The hum of voices behind me faded into nothing. Upstairs, I could hear Leela laughing, her light steps on the floor above. She didn't know what just happened. Didn't hear the words, but I had. And I would remember. There's a difference between being invisible and being made invisible. One happens slowly, like dusk. The other is a decision someone makes for you, in public, with a smile. That day they decided, and for the first time I felt something shift. Not anger, not yet. But something colder, something that did not forget. Have you ever been erased while still standing in the room? What would you do if someone mistook your silence for consent? Let me know, quietly or boldly. What would you do next? After the last guest left, the house exhaled. Empty champagne flutes sat like little ghosts across the table. Trays of half-eaten kelp rolls. Folded napkins untouched. Tasha was upstairs with Julian, already posting recap stories. Fae wellness at home, Fae energy matters, Fae community love. I stayed downstairs, not because anyone asked, because I needed to. I cleared the plates slowly. Not with duty, but with ritual. Each scrape of a fork against porcelain felt like a sentence punctuated. Each glass rinsed like breath released. The woman's voice still echoed. Are you the help? I had answered with a nod, but something inside had not agreed. As I dried the final plate, I noticed the drawer handle, third one from the left, the one no one used anymore. I opened it. Inside, folded and tucked into the back, was my old apron. Cream-colored, worn thin near the waist. A faint grease stain in the shape of Texas. Julian always teased me for that. I hadn't touched it since New Orleans. Since before Harold got sick. Since before I started saying yes to silence. I held it up. The fabric still smelled faintly of cinnamon and bay leaf. Still mine. I didn't put it on. Not yet. I just folded it neatly. Placed it in a fresh drawer, my drawer. One no one else used, one no one would think to open. Then I opened the pantry, counted the jars. Paprika? Fennel. Dried rosemary. Behind a row of oat spreads, my cinnamon tin still sat. Still labeled, do not use, not aligned. I picked it up, removed the sticker, tore it clean, dropped it into the trash without a sound. The jar gleamed again, unmarked, unapologetic. I returned it to the front row. When I turned around, the kitchen felt different. Not reclaimed. Not yet, but no longer foreign. That mattered that evening. I made myself a simple dinner. Not for the table, not for anyone else. Just me. Sauteed greens. An egg poached just right. One of my crinkle cookies still crisp from the batch I'd frozen. I plated it with care, not to impress, but to remind myself that my hands still knew beauty. I sat by the window. No one joined me. No one asked. But I didn't feel invisible. Not tonight. Later, when the lights upstairs dimmed and the hallway fell quiet, I opened my drawer once more. Touched the apron, not out of nostalgia, but readiness. They had seen a version of me they could erase. A background figure, a fading shadow. But that version had limits, and I had a drawer now. A small one? But mine. Morning had become my refuge. Before the house stirred, before the blender whirred, before Tasha's voice filled the air with words like alignment and reset. I made my tea in silence. Let the scent of cinnamon rise with the steam. Just me. Just breath. Some mornings I cooked. Not for anyone else, but because it reminded me I still could. A simple skillet of greens. A biscuit warm from the toaster oven. Food with memory, not performance. This morning felt the same until I emptied the trash. It was routine. Peelings boxes, wrappers folded tight. Then, something unusual. A paper wedged beneath coffee grounds. Thick, glossy. I pulled it out, shook it clean. A flyer. White background, green serif font, floral border. At the top, a Greaves Wellness Retreat. Below it, reclaim your energy in a heritage sanctuary. Address our home. Image our backyard deck. Even the lemon tree Harold planted in '93. I stared at the name again. Greaves. My name. Before I was Lorraine Mendez. Before Julian. Before everything, they were using it, not as tribute, as branding. I turned the flyer over. There it was again. Graves in bold, embossed print. Nowhere did it say Lorraine. Nowhere did it mention family, or legacy, or who built this space. Just Tasha Greaves, in soft italics at the bottom. Founder, holistic facilitator, certified breathwork coach. I held the paper between my fingers. It was thick. Expansional. This wasn't a draft, it was a statement. I looked toward the hallway, heard faint laughter upstairs. The shower running, no one had said anything. Not a word, not a mention, not a warning. I folded the flyer once, then again. Pressed it flat between my palms. So this is what it was. Not just a home rebranded. A name repurposed. It was erasure, polished and printed. A version of my story scrubbed clean and sold with lemon water. I opened the bottom drawer of the side cabinet, found a Ziploc bag, placed the flyer inside, sealed it, then tucked it behind my apron where no one would look. I wasn't ready to confront, but I was ready to remember. I poured another cup of tea. Let it steep longer than usual. In the corner, the cinnamon jar stood still, now unmarked. I touched the lid, wiped a speck of dust from the glass. They could rename the space, redesign the yard, repaint the walls, but they hadn't taken the spice from my shelf. Not really, not yet. And as long as my hands still worked, as long as the kettle still sang, they hadn't taken me either. That afternoon, I couldn't rest. Even with the windows open, even with the wind moving through the lemon tree like old hymns, I kept seeing the flyer. Greaves Retreat, our house. Her name. My name repurposed without me. Something in me shifted. Not anger. Not yet. But a thread pulled loose. So I went to the attic. It wasn't much of an attic. Just a crawl space off the laundry room. Julian once called it dead space. But I kept things there. Things that still mattered to me. I reached behind the old cooler, pulled out the blue accordion folder, dusty heavy, inside documents, receipts, old contracts, papers that had Harold's signature in ink and mine beside it. I sat on the floor and opened them slowly. There it was, the deed. Original title transfer, 1998. Lorraine Mendez 50%. Harold Mendez 50%. I flipped forward. In 2010, after Harold passed, my name remained. In 2016, Julian had requested a joint update. I found the scanned copy. Julian Mendez 25%. Lorraine Mendez 50%. Tasha Graves Mendez 25%. But next to her name there was an asterisk. I followed it to the margin. Pending co-owner verification, signatory not yet notarized. The eye blinked. Pulled out another folder. Checked the county filing stamp. It was never finalized. I flipped again. Nowhere was her signature witnessed. Nowhere was my name revoked. Not then. Not now. I leaned back against the wall. Felt the frame of the house press through the drywall like a spine. For the first time in months, I felt grounded. They'd used my name, but I still held it. In paper, in ink, they had planned a future without me. Branded it, printed it, but the land still whispered my name when the wind turned sharp. I gathered the papers, slid them into a fresh folder, marked it in pen. QCLASTVs. Then I tucked it into my dresser, next to the apron, behind the cinnamon. Later over dinner, Tasha mentioned zoning. Just thinking ahead, she said lightly, in case we expand. Maybe an outdoor sauna? Julian nodded. I sipped my tea, didn't speak. But I looked at them differently, not with bitterness, but calculation. They saw me as soft, drifting, done. But I had paper, and paper is patient. I started writing everything down, not out of panic, not out of anger. Just habit and need. I had managed resort kitchens during flood season, tracked inventory down to the ounce, balanced payroll when the ovens failed. So I made a new notebook, hardcover, no label, page 1 withdrawals, dates, the strange labels, joint maintenance, shared groceries, wellness support cushion, page 2, words they didn't think I'd remember. She's kind of always around. Maybe it's time for her to contribute something real. I wish she'd stop hovering. I copied each line as it had been said. No edits, no softening, a line per wound, ink as witness. By the third night, I added the flyer, folded neatly, tucked between the pages, Graves Wellness Retreat, using my name, selling my home, smiling in someone else's legacy. I wasn't shaking, wasn't crying. But something had shifted. I added sections, notes from brunch, a memory list, names of guests who saw me, who didn't. Then, while dusting the dresser, I found it. A yellow envelope. Faded handwritten, Harold's handwriting. "2 only if you need it." My breath caught. I opened it slowly. Paper soft from time, folded 3 times. His voice came back in silence. "Lo, if you're reading this, I'm probably where I can't pour you tea. So I'll be quick. You built every part of this life with your bare hands." I saw it. I never forgot. If they forget, if they pretend you weren't the roots, remind them. Without shouting, without breaking. Stillness has a power they'll never understand. Your hands know how to build. Build again. Don't let them fold you up. Love, H. I closed my eyes, held the letter against my chest, felt its weight settle, no heat, just steadiness. I placed it beside the notebook, then added a new line on the next page. Harold's words. My hands built this. They forgot? I didn't. I stood, walked to the pantry, opened the cinnamon jar, inhaled deep, warmth memory, the scent of mornings when I still felt needed. I didn't speak. Didn't cry, just stood there, alive, still here, and ready. The next morning I brewed tea the same way I always had. 3 minutes steeped, no sugar, just cinnamon. The routine was unchanged. But something inside me was not the same. At the kitchen table I opened the blue notebook, turned to a fresh page, wrote 2 words at the top. Next steps. I took a deep breath. Step 1, call Richard Levin. Harold's attorney. We hadn't spoken since the Prop 8 hearing. He'd always been kind, precise. Quiet. I found his number in an old contacts book, still the same. When he answered, I recognized his tone before his name. "Lorraine," he said, warm with memory. "It's been a while." I told him I needed a review. Ownership documents, legal clarity. He didn't press for reasons. Just said, "Tuesday at 9. Bring what you have." I circled it on a calendar page and underlined it once. Step 2, reap in my own financial account. Back in 2020, Julian had moved everything under a household umbrella. It had felt efficient then. It felt hollow now. I logged in through my old laptop, reset the password, took my time. Inside the savings tab, the numbers looked thinner than I remembered. A list of withdrawals showed up, one by one. Dates, descriptions, family expense coordination, shared household food cost. Retreat prep groceries. None of it had my name on the receipts. Just deductions. Signed under my access. I printed each transaction, held the papers in both hands. They trembled slightly. Not from weakness. From memory. Step 3, confirm property status. I pulled out tax notices. Old filings Harold had kept in a leather envelope. Last year's listing, Julian's name appeared first. Mine was second. Tasha's name floated at the end, marked with an asterisk again, same as the deed. I flipped to the notation. Pending co-ownership, verification incomplete. Incomplete. That word felt like an opening. A breath I didn't know I was holding. I slid everything into a new folder. Labeled it in clean block letters Caligula CTIV. I placed it inside my dresser drawer. Right next to the cinnamon jar, beside Harold's letter. The paper carried no anger, just truth. Later that evening, over a plain dinner, Tasha floated ideas. I'm thinking maybe an outdoor sauna, she said. Just for phase 2. If we grow fast? Julian smiled, excited, eager. I stirred my tea slowly, didn't speak, but I watched them carefully. They didn't know that I knew, that I had begun. Not with threats, not with shouts, with paper, with names, with stillness. They had underestimated the quiet, but the quiet keeps records, the quiet waits, the quiet plans. And now, the quiet had begun to move. I stopped paying the bills. No announcement, no family meeting, no late-night warnings, just a quiet click. I logged into the shared account, unlinked my pension deposits, redirected my benefits to the account Richard helped me reopen. 3 simple steps. Each felt like a breath I'd been holding for too long. By the time the next auto payment was due, I was no longer funding the show. The house didn't notice it at first. Tasha still floated through the kitchen, flaxseed smoothie in hand. Julian still assumed groceries magically appeared. But silence builds, and money has a way of exposing who's listening. It was Friday afternoon when the first crack formed. Tasha had a live stream call with a new investor, some eco-retreat firm from Oregon. I heard her from the hallway. Glossy voice, practiced pitch. Yes, the next phase includes a sauna, an herb wall, and a full online course experience. Then, pause. A second pause. Then her voice lower. Oh, that's strange. No, it's a company card. Let me just try another one. Silence again. The stir of panic barely veiled. She walked briskly past the kitchen. Didn't look at me. I was folding parchment paper. The smell of brown sugar and butter curled warm in the air. I didn't ask. But I knew. 2 hours later, I heard her upstairs, pacing, fast, muttering. Julian called out. Something about, why didn't we check the balance? Something else about, I thought Mom was still routing through. I wiped my hands. Checked the timer. 10 more minutes on the cookies. I didn't respond, not out of coldness, but because nothing needed saying. I had paid for this house long before Tasha discovered wellness. I had stocked the pantry while Harold was in chemo. Kept the lights on when Julian was between jobs. And they hadn't noticed when I gave. They wouldn't get to complain now that I'd stopped. The next morning, Julian found me outside, trimming basil by the steps. He hesitated. Shuffled forward like a boy again. Hey, Mom, did you change something with the account? I looked up. The sun was behind him, casting a long shadow. I redirected my deposits, I said simply. Thought it was time I kept track of things myself. He scratched the back of his neck.
Oh. Yeah, okay.
We just didn't realize? The retreat planning? I stood, dusted my hands. If there's something you can't afford? I said quietly. Maybe you're planning the wrong thing. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Didn't argue, didn't apologize, just nodded, once, and walked back inside. I returned to my herbs. The air smelled like lemon and something green and fresh. For the first time in a long time, my silence had weight, not the kind that bends you down, the kind that stands you up. The email arrived at 6:17 a.m. Subject, ownership confirmation, property file 482G. I sat with my tea, cinnamon steam curling up in the quiet, clicked open. Read slowly. Richard had written clearly. Lorraine Mendez retains 50% legal ownership of the property located at 1248 Sycamore Lane. Co-ownership requests filed by Julian Mendez in 2016 remain incomplete. No finalized notary documents on file for Tasha Greaves Mendez. As of current county records, no legal authorization has been granted for property based commercial use under any third party. No emotion, just fact. I read it twice, then hit print. The machine hummed softly down the hall, each word etched in black. I folded the letter carefully, slid it into a plain white envelope. No note, no message. I didn't need to explain what already belonged to me. I placed the envelope at the center of the dining table, between the eucalyptus centerpiece and the polished quartz coasters. Then I baked a fresh batch of oatmeal cranberry cookies, just because. Around 9, I heard her. Tasha, coming down the stairs, voice tight with sleep and stress. I'll check the transfer again. Maybe it's the bank's lag. She was on the phone, but her pace slowed when she saw the envelope. I didn't turn around. Kept rinsing dishes, soft clinks under running water. She picked it up, opened it, read. No gasp, no shout, just silence. Longer than I expected. Behind me, I could feel the shift. The pause of someone who'd touched something they weren't ready for. Is this new? She asked, cautiously. I dried my hands, turned to face her. It's not new, I said softly. It's just always been true? She blinked, swallowed. I could see the words forming, arguments arranging themselves. But none of them left her lips. Instead, she nodded once, pressed the envelope shut, set it back on the table. Didn't thank me. Didn't argue. Just left, I watched her walk out to the patio, phone to her ear, but not talking, just standing, still. Later that afternoon, Julian came home early. His tone was light, trying to test the air. Hey, Mom, you doing okay today? I nodded.
I'm well.
He hesitated. She's just feeling a bit overwhelmed. The retreat stuff's a lot to juggle. I offered him a plate, warm cookie, soft center. He took it, chewed slowly, didn't speak for a while. When he finished, he placed the plate down carefully. Looked at me, really looked. You're not mad, he said, like it surprised him.
No, I replied.
Not mad. Then what? I could see him wonder. If not mad, then what is she? But he didn't ask, and I didn't offer. Some truths live better in silence. That night, no one mentioned the envelope, but it remained on the table, visible in the morning light. A quiet reminder, not a warning, not a threat, just presence. Have you ever held back the truth until the silence said it for you? What would you do if the home you built was being renamed without you? Would you speak or simply show them the deed? Let us know you're not alone. The law office was small, no fancy walls, no fountain lobby, just books, neatly stacked, exactly where they needed to be. Richard greeted me with a nod, didn't offer a handshake. He knew I'd never liked unnecessary fuss. Come in, Lorraine, he said. Everything's ready. I sat down across from him. Same chair I'd used after Harold passed. He slid the folder forward, thick. Teddy?
Take your time.
I opened it slowly. First page, property deed. My name still in bold, still 50%, still valid. Second page, Julian's attempted co-ownership update dated 2016. Marked incomplete. Third page, Tasha's file. No notary. No signatures finalized. Nothing changed. Nothing legal. Richard watched me as I turned each page. Didn't interrupt. Didn't fill silence. He let the paper speak. Halfway through, I looked up. If they try to sell, I asked. Horlisi, you have full right to block any commercial use, he said. You're not a guest. You're an owner, I nodded. And if I want to freeze everything, you can. No explanation, no emotion, just fact. I flipped to the bank statements. Cross-checked the notes I'd brought, the withdrawals I hadn't approved. He flagged them one by one. All of these can be challenged, he said. Do you want to start a file?
Not yet, I replied.
He nodded. We moved on. Tax records, county filings. No updates since 2019. Would you like to file a stop order on the property? He asked. I looked down at the paper again, then out the window. The view was plain. Just parked cars, a sidewalk, a father walking his child across a crosswalk.
No drama, just direction. Yes, I said quietly.
Do it, he began typing. Not fast.
Just steady. The keyboard clicks filled the space. When he finished, he printed the form, had me sign. Black ink. 4 lines, my name, twice, legal, firm. Anything else?
He asked.
I closed the folder, ran my hand over the cover. No, I said. Not yet. He stood, walked me to the door. As I stepped outside, the sun was higher. The air felt less heavy. I wasn't angry, wasn't shaking, but I wasn't invisible anymore, and I wasn't done. I came home just before noon. No one noticed. The door creaked the same way, the lemon tree swayed the same. Tasha's voice echoed faintly from upstairs. I set my bag down, washed my hands, tied on my apron. The dough had rested enough. I scooped neat rounds onto the baking tray, pressed each one gently with the back of a spoon. Through the kitchen window, I saw Tasha pacing on the deck, phone propped up, laptop open, tripod adjusted, retreat planning day, a trial run for potential investors. The table was dressed in sage green linen, crystals arranged in a half circle, cucumber water sweating in glass jars. I slid the tray into the oven, 12 minutes. Back upstairs, the call had started. I heard her pitch. Here at Greaves Wellness, we believe healing begins at the roots. And our home reflects that. She never said whose home, never said who built the roots. The timer ticked. I stirred cinnamon into tea, watched steam curl, then vanish. Then, a clatter. Then silence. The oven still hummed, but upstairs stillness. I heard a door open. Footsteps down the stairs, sharp and quick. Tasha appeared, phone in hand. She didn't look at me at first, just paced, muttering, "No, I don't know why it bounced. It was approved last week. No, I filed the digital form." "What do you mean, invalid?" Oh, she froze mid-step, looked toward me, eyes searching. I held my teacup steady. "What happened?" I asked, softly. She hesitated. "The permit for the retreat listing," she said, "got flagged. They say the property isn't authorized for commercial use." Her voice trailed off. I nodded.
I see. She waited.
Maybe for anger, maybe for permission, maybe for me to explain. I didn't. I turned to the oven, slid out the cookies. Steam lifted like something holy. I set them on the counter. She lingered, then left the room.
No slamming, no shouting.
"Just exit?" I poured another cup, sat at the table. The house had grown quieter. Not empty. Just listening. The document Richard filed had processed faster than expected. The county registry updated in real time. I didn't need to make an announcement. The system had spoken for me. A woman doesn't need to raise her voice when the law already knows her name. Julian came home just after 5. The door clicked. Keys dropped into the bowl. Shoes shuffled on the mat. I was at the counter, scooping dough for the second batch. The smell of cinnamon and brown butter filled the air. He lingered in the doorway longer than usual. Didn't speak right away. Finally, "Mom," I didn't turn. He stepped in. His voice was careful, like he was testing ice. Tasha told me about the permit." I nodded. He shifted his weight. "They said it was flagged, canceled. Property can't be used for commercial listing. That's kind of sudden." I pressed the dough down with the back of a fork. Neat crosshatch lines. He cleared his throat.
Was that you? I looked up.
Held his gaze. Not sharp, not angry. Just still. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. He sighed, sat down at the table, picked up a cookie, didn't eat it, just held it. I didn't know things were like this. I placed the tray into the oven, set the timer. "I suppose," I said gently. "You were busy?" He winced. "That's not fair. Neither is forgetting whose name is on the deed." He blinked, not from offense, but realization. I walked over, sat down across from him. "I didn't make trouble, Julian," I said. "I just stopped pretending none existed." He looked at me, really looked. For the first time in years, his eyes didn't see a helper or a fixture in the background. He saw a woman with her back straight, hand steady, voice calm, yet firm in the quiet. He placed the cookie down gently. "Are you mad?" "No," I said. "I'm done being invisible." The timer ticked on. He stayed seated, didn't argue, didn't defend, just nodded. Then, almost whispered, "You're different lately." I smiled. Maybe not different, just finally full. He stood, walked to the door. Before leaving, he paused. "You're not planning to leave, are you?" I looked toward the oven. "No," I said. "I'm just making room." He didn't ask what I meant. But as he stepped out, he turned back once more. Hi, and for a moment, he looked like the boy who used to bring me lemons from the tree, hoping I'd make pie. Saturday morning smelled like lemon balm, bleach, and fresh paint. Tasha had been up since dawn, rearranging the furniture again. The dining room turned into a breathwork circle. The sunroom, an intention lounge. She moved quickly, every step choreographed, a show to be filmed, a home to be erased. I stood at the kitchen sink, apron on, cookie dough chilling, thumbprint filling set beside. Raspberry jam Harold had once said tasted like July. The doorbell rang. The first guest arrived, then another. By 10 o'clock, the house buzzed. Women in pastel robes sipped lemon water. One asked if I was the caterer. I smiled, didn't answer. In the living room, Tasha began. "Greaves Wellness is more than a brand," she said. "It's a safe return to self. And this home, this sanctuary is the seed." She didn't look toward the kitchen. I kept shaping the cookies. From the hallway, I heard a woman speak up. Her voice was calm, older. "This place feels lived in," she said. "Is it family land?" Tasha smiled too quickly. "It's our base. My husband and I, we've built our lives here." The next voice cut softer, sharper. "Who built it before that?" The question lingered, floated into the kitchen like smoke. I wiped my hands, removed the apron, folded it once, then walked into the room. No drama, no permission asked. Tasha paused mid-sentence. I stepped to the edge of the circle. "My husband built it," I said quietly, "in 1998. With me, every face turned. Some polite, some surprised, but all watching. "I'm Lorraine Mendez," I continued. I still own half this home. And I still live here? A breath passed through the room. A woman with silver braids gave a small nod. I felt it, she said softly. Felt someone still rooted here. I let that sit. Tasha adjusted her shawl, cleared her throat. Well, Lorraine helps us out from time to time. She's part of the house's story. I smiled gently. History isn't the past, it's the foundation. If you stand on it, you should know its name. Silence again. Not tension, awareness. One woman looked toward the kitchen. What's that smell? She asked. It's incredible. Raspberry cookies, I said, recipes older than the retreat. A few guests chuckled. Not meanly,
Just real.
I turned back to the kitchen, left the circle as calmly as I'd entered. Behind me, voices shifted. Not loud, just quieter. Curious, present as I placed the tray in the oven, I felt at the house breathing again, less staged, less filtered, more like itself, and more like mine. The last guest left around 3. Their laughter faded. The diffuser sputtered one final puff of mint. Silence returned. I stood at the sink washing mixing bowls. Sunlight angled through the window, slicing the counter in gold. Tasha entered with hurried steps. Not stomping, but the kind of fast that comes from trying not to be angry. She waited a beat, then spoke. Please don't do that again. I didn't turn. Let the warm water run over my fingers. Do what? I asked. She exhaled. Sharp, that announcement. In front of my guests. I dried a bowl, placed it gently on the rack. I didn't announce anything, I said. You stood up and claimed the house like it was yours. I turned. It is. She folded her arms. I'm trying to build something here. A brand. A space. That kind of energy. It confuses people. I met her gaze. I wasn't energy. I was truth. She blinked, tightened her jaw. Can't you just let it be? You live here? Isn't that enough? I paused, wiped my hands slowly, then folded the towel in half. Existing in the walls doesn't mean I stop being real, I said. I didn't interrupt your work. I existed. There's a difference. The words hung in the air, not loud, but full. She looked toward the floor, then back at me. I didn't mean to erase you, she muttered. I didn't respond, because it wasn't about what she meant. It was about what she did. Julian stepped into the doorway. He must have heard everything. His eyes shifted between us. But he didn't speak, didn't take sides, didn't rush to fix. Just stood there. I looked at him. Waited, but no words came, so I nodded once. Turned back to the counter. Picked up the lemon zester. I'll be out of your way in a minute, I said. I'm just finishing up. Tasha didn't reply. She left the room quietly.
No slam door, no
Echo, just retreat. Julian stayed a moment longer. Still not speaking, his silence was heavier than hers. When he left, I stayed, zested the lemon, mixed butter with sugar, measured each cup with care. The rhythm soothed me, not because I forgot, but because I remembered who I was before anyone else decided I was too much or too quiet or simply in the way. That afternoon, I baked as if the house had walls again, not mirrors, not screens, just walls and space enough for one woman to be seen. I unlocked the door at 8:00 a.m. The sign above was simple. Sweet enough kitchen, no neon, just carved wood a little uneven on purpose, like a hand reaching instead of posing. The air smelled of warm almond, browned butter, and a hint of cinnamon. I stood a moment in the center of the space. Let the silence settle. No music, no Wi-Fi, no hashtags on the wall, only a counter with 6 stools, old tin shelves. A photo of Harold by the register, dough on his cheek, eyes laughing. I placed the first batch out, sugar twists, thumbprints, lavender meltaways, wrote names in cursive on little paper tags, didn't post about the opening, didn't invite family, didn't say a word online. But at 80:17 the door chimed. She stepped in slowly, maybe 68. Gray curls tucked into a knit cap, soft shoes, soft eyes. I heard you open, she said.
I did.
She looked around like the space might vanish if she blinked. This used to be the tailor shop, didn't it? It did? She smiled. And now? Now it's for women who were told to sit quiet. She touched the edge of the counter. I'll take 2 of those. I wrapped them gently, warm still. By 80:35 another woman came, then 3 more by 9:10, all around my age, some alone, some walked in pairs, but spoke little. They didn't scroll their phones. They didn't ask for Wi-Fi. They read the cards, looked at the old stove behind me, asked about ingredients like they mattered. One leaned close and whispered, my daughter-in-law doesn't let me cook anymore. And another nodded, eyes misting. Mine said my food's too old-fashioned. I poured them tea, listened, not to advise, Just to hold the sound at 112, the door opened again. She walked in without removing her sunglasses. Cream linen jumpsuit, lip gloss perfect, Tasha's friend. The one who once joked that gluten was outlawed in my kitchen. She said nothing at first, just walked the room slowly, paused by the cookie shelf, picked up a lavender one. Are these from scratch?
Yes.
I said. Everything in here is. She took a bite, chewed. Stilled. Goodness, she said softly. Then she sat down. No phone, no posing, just quiet. By noon, there were 9 women in the shop. Some talking, some not. Laughter started rising, not loud, but certain. Like something returning to the surface after holding breath for years. It was close to 4 when I saw him. Julian, standing across the street, just outside the shade of the old oak. Hands in his pockets. Not moving, he didn't cross, didn't wave. Just stood, watching. Inside, the shop had thinned out. A few women lingered with teacups, murmuring about lemon zest and old grief. I wiped down the counter, checked the scones, tried not to look again. At 4:12, the door chimed. I didn't flinch. Julian stepped in quietly, like he wasn't sure he should. He looked around slower than the others had, paused at the photo of Harold, noticed the old oven, touched nothing. I didn't rush over, just pulled a plate from the stack, placed one of the sugar twist cookies in the center, set it on the counter. He approached, eyes unsure. I wasn't sure if you'd... I raised an eyebrow gently. If I'd what? He looked down. Let me in. I nodded toward the stool. I let everyone in, I said. I just don't shrink anymore when they enter. He sat, didn't touch the cookie yet, looked around again, slower this time. It smells like when I was a kid, he said. Late nights before Sunday brunch. I smiled. Still the same recipe. He picked it up, broke a piece, still didn't eat. Silence stretched, not heavy but unfamiliar. Then he said, I didn't know how far it had gone, with Tasha. With you. I poured tea, set the cup beside him. No one ever does. Until they do? He nodded slowly. I was blind.
Just busy?
I said. Another pause. Then I leaned in, elbows on the counter. It's never too late to sit with your mother. He looked up, met my eyes, held them, no apology, no explanation, just something softer than what had been there before. He ate the cookie, closed his eyes, exhaled. Outside, the light had gone golden. Shadows stretched long across the sidewalk. Inside, everything was warm, not fixed. But finally seen, some mothers never raise their voices, they raise homes. Raise children, raise silence until it becomes strength. What would you do if your silence finally had a door? Would you open it? Tell us your story. You're not alone.